Susan Romeo-Gilbert, who will be sharing with us about IG frameworks and setting the context more. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I speak to thousands of students over the last 6 years and beyond, and last night I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up every hour, on the hour, from midnight, thinking of the importance of today to everyone who's here. And I'm humbled and honored to have been asked to actually be the first guest speaker to introduce the whole concept of information governance to you. In 2006, when I worked with WorkSafe BC on their information governance framework, the word wasn't even spoken. It wasn't put together, information and governance, and we started from scratch. So a lot of what I'm saying today is what I have worked through in about 20 months with WorkSafe BC that I'm bringing to the table today. I am Susan, and I am a lecturer in the Information Management Unit at Capilano University School of Business. So I hope I bring some wisdom. My students think I'm wise. I'm not so sure. Okay, so we'll start with the big question. What is governance? What is information governance? What is information? What is governance? We put it together. What is information governance? It really has an industry meaning, and it's about accountability for information, and it enables sort of effective management and delivery of shared information or common data assets and resources across an organization. And with something as large as the BC health system, that sharing of information can be very difficult. And the speaker before me, Pamela, succinctly spoke to that difficulty of getting information to the right people at the right place at the right time and in the right format. So I'll talk today about what is governance, how have we, how could you build a framework, how can you create a project that is successful and can flow easily and have the inputs from everyone in this room and more to allow us to follow this industry definition, which says it encompasses the actions by which a company controls the delivery of information, both internally and externally, okay? And we look at issues on privacy and security, etc. And it manages the overall data strategy and the architecture and the resources that have to be involved in something as large as getting that governance umbrella over all of the information that we have. Information governance addresses the processes, skills, leadership, and assets required to successfully administer your information resources, and allows you to define its business, to run the business, to grow the business, and to transform, in some cases, the business that we have. Why governance and why today? Why are we here today? Use of information is important, yes. We create the ability to access and perform integrated analysis for decision making. The ability to deliver high quality and auditable, really important to be able to audit that data and address the lack of clarity of roles across the organization and who are our stakeholders, number one question. And then we can establish, of course, with that umbrella of governance, establish a policy and guidance around overall data strategies, processes, leadership skills, delivery services. A lot of people forget that factor, that once we get all of this framework in place, how do we deliver it on a day-to-day basis? How do we operationalize it? Big word that we all forget about. Think of data and information as a valued asset. Move away from sort of linear ownership, the old siloed ownership, this is mine, you can have it. Looking at that formalized accountability and stewardship across the life cycle phases, from capture of information, how do we integrate that information, how do we deliver that information and share that information in a knowledgeable way across the organization. Maintain consistency of the same degree for collection, So when we collect the data, that's one thing. We have lots of data across the board. But from that collection, we want to have the same consistency and the same degree for when we deliver and exchange that information across all of the health authorities in your case. At the point of care, we want to be able to capture structured data. Capture data that is meaningful, capture data that is auditable, capture data that's actionable and available for use, as Pamela says, when she walks into the emergency room, all of the information that is relevant to her care is available for the physicians. We looked at today's sort of corporate information flow. I'll get to it really quickly. You want me to get to the framework really quickly, so I will. Lots of information exists, pockets of analysis around financial, health management, population health, service quality, IMT and our own workplace infrastructure and other things are available, but it's in pockets of analysis. We have silos of insight around each of those pockets. So measures of forecast surplus, sick leave, say, for example, measured percentage of BC's 12-year-olds or 12-year-olds or over who smoke, believe it or not. Some sample examples here, research, pharma, MSP measures around percentage of availability of critical applications, etc. All of those silos of information give us actions or reactions sometimes based on our reaction to measures that we have in place. You do have pockets of governance, of information governance, and I wrote them all out, but I see people are here on each area here. Standards, the interoperability, HIE, standards body, SCPME, SCIMIT, lots of acronyms in there. And I was told that this is level, I'm teaching at the 300 level, so I don't have to explain every single one of these acronyms, that you all know them. So they're here, just to show you, give an example of some of the pockets of governance which do exist within the Ministry of Health or within the health sector. And the ability now to pull those smaller pockets of governance into a sort of overall information governance body. Do we pull them together, or do we form a new body? What do we do with that? Problems with current information governance, of course, we have dispersed master data, so the interpretation of that data, heavy data cleansing at the HIM level or any other IM level, who's the provider of that information, so provider identity. The impact of such a problem is on creation of a corporate master or source of truth. Do we know what the source of truth is when we look at a particular piece of data or data set? Maintenance of cleansing and transformation rules, and information dissemination to the right person, right place, right time. Unclear ownership. Who owns the data? Failure to create data in a timely manner. Failure to address changes effectively. Transformational preparedness. Are we ready for a big transformation without data? Business delays, right? That's one of the impacts for making a decision on corporate initiatives. We have business delays for introducing new resourcing strategies to deal with it, and business delays to hinder the ability for an agile and quick transformation. Diverging data definitions. This is my favorite one. What is alternate level of care? What does that mean to everyone in the room? Does it have a different meaning to a different sector, a different person, a different area? What is sepsis? What is day surgery encounter type? Patient safety, what does that mean? Patient length of stay, what does that mean? What is the source of truth for that? And then the impact on such diverging data definitions is on KPI design and management. How do we design our key performance indicators if we don't have common meanings across the board? Maintenance of cleansing and transformation rules, it hinders integration and exchange of data. And then the vendor community, so if we do go out to the vendor community to ask for software or applications or web front ends or whatever, and they lack an understanding or blueprint from the health sector, then it is difficult for them to actually provide a solution set for you. Lack of proper tools, So we have to look at metadata. What is the meaning of the data? How do we come up with a standard meaning that is acceptable across all of the authorities that we have in BC? Extensive impact analysis, failure of replication, and of course duplication. So what is that? Manual, lots of manual effort to get meaning out of this data. Fix after the end user calls. So we fix after Pamela calls in. We fix after Pamela comes to the emergency care, and we don't have that information. So with that quick bringing you up from first year to third year, we look at what is tomorrow's environment for health, or the whole of the health sector. We want establishment of principles and guidelines. I looked at the National Health Service in England, and they've got an IG toolkit, and I've put the website when you guys get the presentation, you can throw off to it, where they want their IG's governance. They have a toolkit that's online, and it actually succinctly draws out all of their rules and regulations around data, and they have some principles and guidelines required to be that are required to be followed to ensure that information that can identify a patient is protected and only used when it is appropriate to do so. So Pamela alluded to that. You think I had a conversation with her before doing this, but she says, it's not everyone has to have my history, but when my history is required, it should be available to the person needing that history. So those are the principles and guidelines that have to be established on use of data for patient care. When deciding whether they needed to use information that would identify an individual, an organization should use the principles as a test, right? So once you have established those principles, when Pamela does come in, that's the immediate test of how well that principle or guideline works. What change is needed when you're looking at information governance? It's all about a big cultural shift, okay? From independent and non-sharing systems, unstructured and accountability, responsibility and control, and limited alignment to measures, and then information ownership. So we have to move away from that historical, this is mine, nobody else gets to see it, or it's my patient and only I can see, and when and how you get that information. We want to move from that to sharing better engineered information flows, structured accountability, responsibility and control, and alignment to key measures set, of course, at the senior level. What are those key measures that we are going to work with? And those key measures, of course, involves, like Pamela says, the inputs of patients. And then that information stewardship. So we're moving from ownership to stewardship. I'm a guardian, I'm a steward of this information. And then that gives us smarter and quicker organizational responses and transparency and responsibility as an organization. And this is my little flow. I love to draw, sorry. I'm really spatial in nature. I'm a 3D kind of person. Tomorrow's IG umbrella environment, so we have that governance across all of the things that we have, and it leads to this intelligence. We have an understanding and an intelligence on the data that we have. Structured and engineered information dissemination, role-based information embedded in our day-to-day workflows, ownership of business outcomes, and it's tied to business performance. That gives us a more automated and sort of shorter life cycle from when the patient sits in front of us to our ability to quickly diagnose what is wrong, what is facing us today. And the little diagram on the right shows my little drawing, my umbrella, and that information reservoir that's managed and controlled by that umbrella of governance. And then we have data flows going, sort of business area stewardship, and the roles that we have within each organization is that steward role, where the data flows through the steward and then from the steward out into the relevant people needing it. So we have, in fact, a structured and actionable, down here, we have structured and actionable information coming out of our models, of our data, sorry. I'm supposed to press this button. So here, tomorrow's corporate information flow, I try to pull out some of the key things: proactive action, outcome analysis, organizational insight, feedback, patient included, integrated information, and complex analytics, transparent to users. So it's simple, it's happening in the background. We ask a question, we get an answer as a user. The tuning happens transparently. And that flow is, in essence, a constant moving. It's not sort of statically coming out in pockets, right? It's a constant flow, and that gives us actionable flow anchored by information governance at both at the strategic level, at the tactical level, and at the operational level. So all three levels of the organization. The value of information governance to health systems is about right data, the right place at the right time, and even more so in the right format, so that we can make that decision. Right data gives everyone in every system, works with the same understanding, and does not require data leveling, and everyone knows who the owner of that data is. The right place, so we want it appropriately sourced, appropriately used, and we have the ability to do impact analysis on that data. And then localization becomes easy, because we don't necessarily have to have, I don't know if I should say this out loud, but we don't necessarily have to have one big central massive data warehouse that is then going to be cumbersome and difficult to manage, and we still wouldn't get anything out of it. But that localization can occur if we know where that is, we know which ones of our data sets is the source of that data, is the source of truth, and then we source the target flows are known, and then we have this inherent impact analysis, and access policies can be enforced in a dispersed manner. It does not necessarily have to be all sitting in one central place. So we put an umbrella of governance around that, and then we're able to manage through having that localization effect. Right time, data released for use at the appropriate point in the lifetime of that data, and appropriate transport or delivery mechanism. We can have the data, we can organize it fine. We have to be able to deliver or disperse, okay, or disseminate or propagate, you could use all those words, the data through the organization. And the service is, when we talk about delivery mechanisms for the service, it's definable, it's enforceable, it's auditable. Part of the life cycle definition is in the delivery of the data, and it's managed properly. And then the last value is having it in the right format. So data is released for use in the appropriate format for each level of use, because we don't have to give our senior execs all the guts of our enterprise data warehouse. Okay? We will roll up and use the visualization tools that removes the noise from the desks of the senior execs. So when they get, like Yoel was saying, he had a report with 300 pages, that's not going to do Yoel any good. He needs 6 things on his screen in a dashboard, and the message he gets from that is more powerful than giving him a 300-page report on his desk. The 300-page report is noise. Appropriate presentation mechanisms and visualization techniques that we have within the business intelligence and business analytics realm. The result is meaningful, it's presented correctly for decision making, it's consistent, and it's interoperable. So we can move from area to area, and the data moves from area to area with that structure, and everyone can build confidence, hopefully 95% confidence in the data that they're receiving to be able to make their decisions. The information governance framework, from an industry best practice, looks at 4 basic domains. So we can't go into an information governance project just thinking all we have to look at is data. We have to look at the business, the structure of the program, the policies, guidelines, and visions. We have to have that delivery service. Notice it's second, it's not last. So up front, we decide how are we going to deliver this system. The NHS Information IG Toolkit is a really, really good example of the delivery of that governance. So I ask everyone to have a look at that at the end. The technology, of course, the back end, hardware, software, roles-based access, critical data, recovery of backup and recovery of critical data. We can't just build it and forget about that gutsy stuff, okay, that the IT people sit in the back and do. Software to maintain and update a sort of enterprise master data warehouse, managing metadata content, so data about data, why did we put this in here, when did we put it in, who put it in, why did we put it in this structure. That sort of information needs to be held as well, not just the raw data. And then data itself, defining standards about master data, metadata, maintaining data quality, and data control. So if you're doing the framework development, if you're implementing it as a project, we have a few questions that we have to ask. What questions will our IG answer? What issues will information governance resolve? What are the roles that will support that information governance? Really important. Who are our data stewards? Are the IG roles clearly defined? How can we articulate all responsibilities for roles identified? Because an information governance framework, an information governance establishment is going to have different roles and responsibilities, and new roles and responsibilities would have to be outlined and agreed upon, and people would have to be hired for those roles. Why is data quality important? That's a big question when we look at information governance. Why do we need it? What impact does poor data quality have, especially in the health sector? We have very little room for error. I hope everyone's agreeing with me. And why does it matter? So around data quality. The purpose is business, when we look at it, and the main goals are around that business information service delivery, technology, and data. We're looking at business processes, business roles and responsibilities, gaps, opportunities, and issues. And we have to be able to define our to-be information governance. So we will look at our existing, because you have existing, and you don't ignore what you have. It just feeds into what is, or how best can we go forward with it. So we'll design or define your key to-be information governance processes, the roles and responsibilities, the processes, and respective organizational components, because it's such a broad across BC authorities. The main goal is to allow greater adaptability and flexibility in the definition, the running, and the management of health care for continuity and privacy of patient care. The main objectives are around, we're looking at standards, and I'm seeing we have presenters here on standards and security and access, audit and quality assessment, and then the back-end information and data processing. We have to design the governance for a service delivery model. Don't forget, we have to deliver. We can't just build it and leave it in the warehouse, and nobody knows how to use it after. Design and develop roles and responsibilities required to successfully administer that information, and then design your to-be governance processes, organizational components, and supporting documents, because lots of documents come out of an information governance framework project. The key assumptions is that governance is a corporate initiative. It's not departmental, nor is it just project-driven. Appointed or designated people will have decision-making capabilities so that they can run. We don't have the whole point of the governance committee is that when we structure the governance committee has the authority to make decisions, and that authority is given to them by their counterparts who have assigned them or appointed them to that governance body. The value of information governance is clearly understood and supported by all members and all participants within the health ministries and sector. So I have an approach, a framework development approach that I'm sharing with you. We're here. We've looked at the industry best practices. I've sat with Ladan and Yoel and Shelley, and they've analyzed and triple analyzed the industry. We've looked at the HIMA, Alberta Health Services. I've looked at the UK NHS, the IG toolkit, and other areas to understand what is it that, from an industry perspective, we're doing with information governance. So we have to assess that current information governance, the processes and tools, see what we have, because you don't necessarily have to throw it away. You determine that information governance and metadata management, the gaps and issues that we have with our current systems. And then there'll be another step where we determine corporate and clinical functional requirements for information governance. And we'll establish some improvement targets. So we're here. What do we have to do to be here? What are our critical success factors, how do we identify those? And then we develop a 2B governance model. Once we do the model, that gets approved, has to be approved, then you begin the implementation process. And the implementation process is a multi-year process. We'll have, as we implement, once you have implemented, it's an ongoing, it's a cycle, it's a life cycle. You have change management, communication, coaching, education that sits around the governance over time. And just bear in mind, I put 2017, but I'm sure it's been going on beyond that. But it's a multi-year timeline, so we can set expectations early that this is not going to happen in 6 months. In 6 months, we might have all of our as-is governance processes and tools identified, solidly documented, and then we can start sort of, looking at metadata and looking at what kind of improvement targets are we expecting, that sort of stuff. But it's going to go on for at least 18 months before you actually see anything. We might give you a banana where we start saying, have something to eat. Here is a banana until we get all of this done. But the whole point of this is sort of agile project management, where we would, as we identify things, we would feed it out to people and get feedback. So it's a really life cycle that we're looking at. I'm going to skip this. If we're performing IG process assessment, so I'm just pulling an example from one of those squares. If in the purpose of the assessing your current systems is you analyze governance, of course, in 4 domains. We define that current information governance business process and organizational components, and we identify and define any current gaps. So some of the questions: what are the critical success factors? What are the key components of the existing governance business processes? What is that to-be governance business process? What are the major flows of information that we need between and within all of the authorities? We have to identify those. We have to look at risk management, knowledge management, and decision support systems to enable sort of that overall governance process. And then what are the key technology tools that we need to have? So the tools are the last thing. We have to look at the business. We have to understand what is it we need from a business perspective or from a health perspective. And then we would say, okay, what are the tools and techniques that will satisfy these requirements and these needs? Okay? And then the scope of it is we look at, and I'll have a little diagram to show you, information. We look at information governance itself, so we'll have an information governance management process, information standards process, audit and quality process, knowledge and information management process, security. Did I forget that one? It's in there. Security will be in there, privacy, and then the analytical services delivery. So how are we going to present you with all of that analytics? That's why I say it's a multi-year process, right? There's a lot to do. Some of the key deliverables, we'll define that governance vision. We'll have the CFS at all 4 domains: business, technology. Am I testing you? What are the 4 domains? Business, delivery, services, technology, and data. And then we'll get some high-level processes. We'll feed that to everyone, and then the acceptance of those high levels, and then we drill down and get some more detailed levels of the to-be process. And then we have some primary business scenarios, so you can run some of those primary health scenarios through the system, and then we'll test the service delivery when we run those primary scenarios through it. Some of the critical success factors that you hopefully pull up would be executive sponsorship, really important at the C-suite. That's all the CIOs in the room, all the CEOs in the room, CFOs in the room. There's some executive sponsorship at that level. Patient resources. You think I spoke with Pamela before I wrote this, but I didn't. So patient resources are the information governance team involved in it. We'll be able to envision the solution, take small steps, and include post-implementation activities in your success factors. And then here I have what a high-level sort of information governance flow would look like, and we want to achieve this. Key information governance triggers, processes, and flows. So yes, we would have the governance strategy, we'll have a governance committee, we'll have lots of things to happen, but there must be things that would trigger that governance changes or even the existence of an actual governance standard. So external, of course, legislative, Ministry of Health changes, new data interchange requests may happen between and amongst authorities, information industry standard changes, and privacy commission, important if they make any changes. Those the internal ones, if by chance you have a reorganization, and right now you're going through that transformation initiative, senior executive level staff changes can trigger changes to your governance. Key performance indicators or measures may change over time, as is probably human nature. New information systems implementation, new data interchange requests, information standard change, systemic sort of data changes and archival requests, periodic code reviews, and then audit changes. So with that in mind, I'm going to just run through the 5 key areas around that whole information governance process. And the first one is to manage information governance at both the clinical and corporate level, and that involves the establishment of an information governance committee. And the governance committee sits in that box, in that process box, and that's sort of once any of the things above, the triggers above occur, then that committee steps in to start working through the governance process, okay, flow. Manage the standards that we have as our information governance standards. We'll manage that information and security access. And these 3 things are actually the defining activities within the governance framework. So they define what we have to do, and then the next 3 things. We'll manage information audit. So when we do an audit on our systems, then if there's an audit breach or there are changes in the standards that we have, there are requests for changes or systemic data cleansing requests, etc., key performance indicators change, it goes back to the Information Governance Committee, okay, for their approval, for their recommendation on what needs to be done, and it goes back into the flow. If we just have some small changes when we're going through that, we can go to the manage information and data. This is the back end. It pops over to the information side of things, and they would do the changes or updates to the data, and they prepare the information for consumption by all of the users. And if that change is big, it goes back to the audit committee, and the audit committee decides whether or not there's a breach, or if not. Okay, and once the information and data management side, the database people, the IT guys, are finished with the changes, that's the end of the process. So that back end 4 and 5 are the doing activities that you wouldn't see as a day-to-day user, but we're preparing this for delivery for you. So that's the high-level process flow when we talk about information governance. Related questions: what is the accountability of the assigned governance committee? So now we have a process. You're going to ask who is going to be on this committee, where will they come from, how do we appoint them, who will be on what will represent a quorum on that governance committee? Do we have 25 people or do we have 5 people? Right? And I like to stay on the lower end. 6 people is plenty. How will requests, right, for changes or additions of governance be initiated? How will work be assigned to various bodies? How will approvals be managed and tracked? Will there be layers based on type of requests? So then we'll have to identify what are those types of requests in sort of big chunks, and and then make sure that we can manage through all the requests that will come when we have this governance in place. What is the governance group's accountability to senior executives or to boards? So once we establish that governance committee, how do they report, or whom do they report to? Key strategic needs, summary. This is an example of when you're going through building out an information governance framework, you're going to be touching base and talking to a lot of different groups and individuals and senior level, strategic level people. And this, I call it a chiclet, is where you collect all of that information, and the senior executives can see their responses and their needs in one place. So if I look at corporate information governance, and I've gone around and spoken to all of the key executives around that, some commonalities will pop up, and I call them sort of key business needs. And so I put them into this little chiclet box. So key business needs would be establish a common language or vocabulary of terms, improve the governance process, you can't see that from here, but establish data quality control measures, etc. And then out of that would come the key information needs. So you'll say, I want some standards, definitions, technical and external facing definitions. So you may have internal medically related language, but that needs to also be transferred. If you're talking to a patient, what's the language that we would use? And you have to determine what that is, because the heavy technical language, I listen to Pamela, she sounds like a pure medical doctor, but I wouldn't know what any of that means if I'm just an ordinary patient. Common measures, data elements, deal with small sample sizes that negate privacy. So those are the information requirements. The thing that's really important, if I determine what is the definitions, right? What is the definition for ALC, for surgical daycare, definition for sepsis. But down at the bottom here, you sort of color code this, because when you start looking for the information, you say, what do I have? So here are the needs, right? Here are the key information needs. Do I have it? Do I have it somewhere? Do I have it stored somewhere? Which organization has it? Is it in a common place, or is it separated? Is it in other warehouses? So you color code that information requirement. Someone asks you for some type of information. That's their need. You have to go and analyze and say, do I have it somewhere? If I have it, where is it? Is it in a structure where it's an enterprise-wide, or is it individually set somewhere? Do I have to go and find that source data? Because we don't have it at all. So you use this little chiclet box to sort of pinpoint, what do I have, what don't I have, how do I get it? It's not there at all. So then we need to go into another process to get it if we don't have it. So these checklists, I've done one for the corporate information governance. I've done one for education and communication, because when you introduce information governance, there's lots of training to be done, lots of education to be done across the board to get everyone with that common understanding of what is being done and communicating that to the right levels. So I've done one for that. I'm not going to go through that right now. And I've also done one for data, the back end, information data and information issues, operational systems, foundational efforts for new data collection, existing data requiring modifications for granularity, versioning, historical needs. What condition is the data in? Is it in good enough condition to satisfy the analysis that we have to do on it? And that's required of it. So I've done one for that as well. You can have a look at that. It's usually data collection. We want to be able to improve data collection, but we also want to be able to improve data dissemination. Right? So how do we come up with that? What types of information do we need? So I've done one for that as well, and I'll let you guys read that. I am leaving the PowerPoint behind. I'll go through that. And then, so the one big thing is that introduction of new roles and responsibilities within governance. So we wouldn't be able to operate with the same premise that everyone's already on a committee so they know what to do. We look at what are the current roles involved in governance, what are the changes in roles and responsibilities that we'll have to establish, what are the competencies, the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to execute these new roles and these new processes, what are the key organizational structural changes that we have to put in place, so an information governance group, how do we come about and work with creating something like that, what are the key components and behaviors encapsulating the stewardship role and the stewardship culture. Deliverables from something like that, it would be, when we do that in a project, would involve roles and responsibilities. We design a high level, what we call as-is role summary. Do we identify all the roles? Do we have them? Where are they sitting? Do we need to consolidate, or do we need to get new ones altogether? And then we define that to-be role, and then we're looking at sort of the key organizational structure. How is that role now going to fit within our existing organizational structure? And of course, we look at as a deliverable, the competencies required to do that role. We look at an executive committee of business and IT and patient reps in that, data governance program team, so working group that will work with the data governance, information and governance steering committee, a data governance or management policy, data guardian steward policy, and a data steward practice directives. So how are you going to do this in a day-to-day or on a day-to-day basis? Delivery services, remember I keep saying, yes, we have it all, but how do we deliver it? How do we disseminate it? We're looking at identifying de facto stewards, and these stewards will assign or identify a combination of corporate and business units. So we look at a stewardship program manager, stewardship project manager, subject matter expertise, data definers, who's going to define the data, how are we going to transform, if we have to transform the data, the raw data, who are going to read that data, understand that data, interpret that data, and then we have someone who looks at the metadata, the data about data. So we have to create an automated stewardship repository, training and support for our stewards. We're not going to say, here's a steward, here's a job, here's a description, go do it. There's going to be a training program for that, or will have to be. And then you develop a balanced scorecard for those delivery services to measure your service level agreements on the information governance work. Okay? So I've just done a really quick list for you to see that it's actually it could be quite a lot of new roles coming up. Okay? Information Governance Committee, an audit supervisor, information and data senior analysts. We need tracking analysts, right, to manage those requests that are coming in for changes in information governance, executive data guardian, data warehouse security and access analysts, analytic service request tracking supervisor for sort of self-serve applications that we may want to build, etc. So I've blown out the information governance standards author. This is what his potential role will look like. So he's the author, and his key activities would be around recording the life cycle of requests through the standard request workflow, responding to an IT project requiring a new change or withdrawal of an information standard or data change, and then responding to an information standard audit. So this work will come out of the project where you have your potential roles will be identified, and then each role that's been identified, you will pull up and create the key activities for that role. So in other words, a job description. Okay? What are the success? I'm almost done. What are the key success factors for this whole governance framework development project? It will be designed and developed and implemented information governance organizational processes. At the end of it, it will be done. It should be done. You would implement a metadata registry. We can call it metadata, we can call it master data, because we have lots of metadata repositories already. We can build one that actually services the governance level. Extensive integration with back office metadata repositories and existing data warehouses for full realization of benefits. And of course, we'll have in that embedded communication and education across the board. Patient benefit and impact, standardized rules and definitions, safety, less medical errors, improved patient care per authority, consistent patient care across authorities, patient management system, access to patient information for swiftness of care on a need-to-know basis, of course. There are financial benefits. There would be reduced costs, not necessarily reduced jobs. I know people get scared when they hear reduce something. But with the training and retraining that's required, people can be spread up across. With some training, they can change jobs. Enablement of the identification of new initiatives reduces the duplication of efforts, especially from a staffing perspective, not just in the back end, in the data duplication. Reduce risks. New IT initiatives are rolled out with less costs, so hopefully quicker and more efficient information rollout leads to less costs, reduce IT data support and maintenance costs. And of course, we have non-financial benefits, improvements around quality, around timeliness and availability of the data, ease of gathering metadata, and it provides a more consolidated and accessible information governance across the board. And of course, it reduces duplicate data entry of information. Those are the key success factors. To conclude, information governance should always be implemented incrementally. We cannot take huge chunks At the same time, I give my analogy about a banana because bananas satisfy children, my children anyway, my boys. I have 3 boys. When I go home from a hard day's work, all 3 of them will be pulling on one of my legs because they're hungry, and I'm trying to prepare dinner. So one day I got a banana, well, 3 bananas. I had 3 bananas, and I gave them 3 bananas, and they sat and they ate their 3 bananas, and the house went quiet. And I'm like, whoa, this is it. The banana is the trick. So we will give bananas. We do that incremental, because then it allows the whole governance process and the work that has to be done in the background, in other words, the dinner, will be prepared properly so that when we get called to the table, everyone can sit quietly and enjoy the dinner. So we will do this incrementally. It's a multi-year journey, right? It must be planned, it must be owned and enforced at the highest level. And there will need to be the appointment of a body or structure or person within the body to own, manage, and commit to the data assets that you have. And use a structured framework for addressing every item in scope. Okay, business, delivery services, don't forget the delivery services, I'll say it again. Delivery services, technology, and data, all 4 aspects. Create a transition plan with the end vision in mind. Okay, you'll get the end vision once you do all the initial interviews and what are the business needs and how are we going to do this. That end vision will come up. So you get that end vision in mind and have a pragmatic and tactical steps to moving forward in a multi-year environment. And then finally build a roadmap. Okay, what are some of the low-hanging fruit in my bananas? Identify those bananas and identify the order in which those bananas will be done. And then within the bigger framework, you'll have all of that managed out so that you know where you're going. Okay, but you'll take it a step at a time. Okay, I'm done. Thank you very much. I do have time for questions, 5 minutes.
Yes. Yeah, we can take a few questions.
Don't ask me anything too hard. It's still early. Any questions? Oh, that's good.
I have a question.
Oh, Joel.
You used the word steward and owner a few different times, and sometimes it seemed it was clearly different, and sometimes they were interchangeable. Can you clarify what you mean with the word owner and steward?
Okay. So ownership, the owner comes from the old way in which people looked at data. So, you know, you've been working on your system, and you've created and own the data that you've sort of populated in a little spreadsheet. Lots of times, even though we have all these big information systems and we have data and we're supposed to have a common sort of approach to getting that data out, people still have their little pet systems that they've been putting in information that hasn't even reached our corporate information assets as yet. And that ownership is difficult for people to give up. So when we come across and we say, we need this data because someone else over there needs to see it, people think, no, this is mine. They go away on vacation, they lock their door, and no one else can see that information. That's theirs. That's the ownership concept. The stewardship concept is the responsibility for holding, okay, that ownership. It is ownership, but it is a stewardship, is that I have this information that's available to all who needs it, when they need it, how they need it, why they need it. And so the steward is actually a representative of the overall organizational needs, understands the overall organizational needs, and is the one person or point of contact for that sort of source of truth. So the steward looks after the source of truth. The owner looks after his or her own little piece of data. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the individual within a department. It could be an authority within authorities. So an authority may own data and not want to share that data with other authorities. Does that make sense? Whereas the steward would be across all authorities, knowing, within each role base, what is the source of truth and manages that the changes or updates or agreements around that source of truth, the metadata around that source of truth. Okay. Oh, there's a hand.
It strikes me that, especially since you're talking about owners and stewards, that to shift to that stewardship model, you have to have really effective communication.
Yes.
Do you have any advice on how to foster that, especially when you're looking at our complex health system, where we have so many moving parts?
Well, that's why I said that education is really, really important part of the whole framework. So yes, when we talk about information governance, we look at just, how do we manage at the 4 levels: technical, data, business, and what else? So delivery service. So when we're doing the delivery service, sorry, that was a test, When we're doing the delivery service model, that delivery service will involve a heavy layer of education. So once we get people across understanding, so we have sort of understanding the purpose and the role of information governance, and we educate around that, then you'll find that that stewardship role starts to supersede the ownership role. Make sense?
I was actually more interested in the communication role.
How you disseminate that?
How do you keep the lines of communication open so the people doing the work know how to get access into and talk to those data stewards? Because that's where you get that ownership. Like, I don't want to let it go because I need to know exactly what's going on.
That's right. Well, I started off by saying there needs to be a cultural shift. And part of the cultural shift is to educate on the role of the steward. The steward is not trying to take away your information or your data. The steward is there to make sure that there is a consistency across the board on that data and manage through that process. When you go through the project and there is a socialization, you don't just sit, hopefully the committee doesn't sit in a little corner. There is that engagement across the board. You start to get that change in an understanding from, yes, you may be, as an authority, the owner of a particular type of data set, yes, but from a bigger picture across the health, all of the authorities and the Ministry of Health, that there is now a steward, and the steward reports into each owner, if you wish, and establishes that movement or interoperability of data across the board. Yeah. Make sense? Does that answer the question? Okay. I'm done.
I'd like to thank Susan once again for a fantastic presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much.